In the afternoon, it's a traditional workshop where you teach computation. I used HTML and JavaScript. There were CSS in there as well. I tried to not go into any of them in depth because we simply did not have the time. The goal was to give them a flavor of this. We started off by creating very simple elements on an HTML page. I also asked them to download Bootstrap. Uh, Being able to save that zip, unpack it onto your desktop. And I should also mention here that for about a third to a fourth of the girls, this would have been their first time ever sitting in front of an editor, meaning when you open up an HTML page or a JavaScript page, you get the syntax highlighting, and you see all of this syntax that looks like something that is incomprehensible, right? So I try to ease them in. The very first lesson, I have a blank page that I simply drag onto the browser. Then I go through the discussion of how something is executed. So I talk on the Turing complete aspect of a language. Obviously, I don't use the word syntax, I don't use the word Turing complete. I just simply talk about those ideas, try to relate them to real life, the concept of a variable, the concept of something that repeats, the concept of organizing your work, which would be what functions are, and to try to make this accessible and tell them that the syntax, there is no good reason for which, there's no good reason to its shape other than that the creators of the language decided that that's how it should be. And so we hopefully made a accessible introduction to this. I know that I sped up as the week went on, and I think I over taught or gave them a little bit too much, but I think there was some clear takeaways there. So let me show you here what the examples are. We started off Monday with a simple page, as I mentioned, and I went through writing an instruction on the page, which would be, just saying hello world and having the interpreter not know what to do with that, which would be the web page, simply showing it, and then putting, say, bold tags on it. Again, it's a blank page with a string and bold tags at the end. And by the way, if you do not know this, and maybe I should show it here. Let me go ahead and pause just to do it on an editor. So as you can see here, I have a blank page on the editor, and then I have a browser. I'm going to go ahead and drag that page onto the browser. As you can see here, there's nothing on it. And then, of course, if I say hello, and reload that page, you will see hello. So that's where I start. Then I put a tag on it. In this case, I'll put the bold tag, and we can see that that changes. Perhaps a better one is an H1 tag or header 1 tag. And we can do the same thing with an image. When you bring in an image, that is a very powerful demonstration because you're bringing in something that is visual. And that is an important part of the afternoon exercises, doing things that are visual and that give some immediate feedback. So we do this on its own at first, then we talk about creating a CSS shape, and let me show you that next. So creating a shape is much more involved, but it's still simply a tag. It's sort of ugly. The other thing important to notice well is that you don't have to worry about all those other HTML elements for correctness, like headers and body and all that. The browser will fill it in itself, so you can just add the tag that you want to show. So in this case, you can see here that you will get a shape. And so we're thinking here now in terms of coordinate systems, radius, and there's several things there that they can start to play with. Ask them to put in a number of little shapes on the board. They can also play with the curvature. They could do squares and other things. If they're moving pretty fast through the material, there's even sites that have CSS tags that can create a wide variety of shapes on the screen. Now, the other thing as well is that all of this is really on a site that has all of this content. As you can see here, there's also background when it comes to how this gets what do the tags mean. So for example, the z-index is one that's not obvious. Also for someone who has not written graphics before, that positive is down, which is different than what they would be used to. So there's enough there to think of when it comes to creating shapes. I then gave them this exercise, which meant they had to position things in a certain way on the page. They also had to think about colors, and they also had to work with the z-index, because as you can tell there, some things are on top of others. So there was enough there, considering that many girls have never seen an editor before or a language, and moving through all of this to cover that afternoon. For those that had more experience, they started to play with Bootstrap. And as I mentioned, one exercise that we did do is, after we went through the basics, is we look for the image tag inside of the default page on Bootstrap, and we change the image. And Bootstrap, it's a pretty slick interface, so when you do make that change, you can see your own image, or an image of your own choosing, in this very slick interface. All of the code that I gave them, I placed in Dropbox, and so I would give them that link, or remind them of that link every day, and they could make direct downloads for everything that they would need for that day from that folder. So that was the first day. I have a lot of notes on the README as well that have links that you may want to use. These were my own personal notes of what was happening every day. Towards the bottom here, you can see here, web document basics. If you are not very fluent in HTML and JavaScript, you'll want to review. There are here some language basics. The most important parts are lecture 2 and 3. This is my own course, arrays and objects, and then functions. You can refer to this on your own, and I'll send a link to the repo as well. One last thing to note, when it comes to the afternoon, the background of the young women does start to show. In the morning, they were all on the same page because all of these ideas are new. In the afternoon, some of them would have had some experience before. And so if you've never really seen an editor and you're sort of shy about testing things, it'll take you a long time to do them. If you've already had some familiarity, none of them had done this specific thing before, you just have a higher comfort level. So I would say it would take them 4 times as long, some of them. And so you'll want to keep some harder exercise for those that can move through it quicker, just to keep them engaged and help out those that need extra help. So let me go ahead and go then to the next day. The next day we sort of had a jump in complexity, and here is where perhaps you have to be gentle or do a little bit less. I started out with an exercise, and let me bring back my editor. I started out with an exercise that simply created a shape, the same shape that they had created the day before, but now was doing it programmatically. So let me show you this here. This is all that they had to do. So just in order to be able to create a shape, and let me drag and drop the HTML file. And as you can see there, I have a shape, and it's being placed randomly. Now this interface that I've created onto this function has a lot more functionality. So you can start to enter the coordinates of where you want that shape to appear. You can start to, I believe you might be able to vary the opacity. And so there's a lot more that you can do. So at first, just let them get some familiarity. There is here the concept of creating a variable, of invoking that variable. And there's an opportunity there, of course, to be able to ask them, say, to create a shape or to create a face or something like this. I then talked briefly about list of things. And oh, by the way, before I go on to the next exercise, there is a lot that is in that thing, that file called magic.js. And that is simply doing all of the manipulations in order to make that possible. You might want to, well, not you might want to, you for sure you want to read what is happening there, just so you have an understanding of what that is. I then moved on to talk about list of things, as I said before, and acting upon this list of things. So what we did is we created an average color for a certain circumference of a point on a painting, and we provided all of that. And so if I go to the solutions here, on a file that they were not asked to understand. However, let me wrap my text. You can see that starting here, we have the hex values for that averaged out point, right? And so the goal is for them to be able to iterate through a list of information. You can start off with something very simple, like let's say an array of numbers, and have them move through that array of numbers and write them out, say, to the console, or console would probably be the easiest. And then you can have them take this next challenge. It seems like it's pretty daunting, but it's no different. If I show you the solution, well, let me show you the actual painting before I move on to the solution. You can see here that if you do things right, you actually get the picture of the Mona Lisa. And that is a very nice reward, because we don't tell them what it is. We just tell them, hey, there is this bunch of dots that you have to put on the screen. And this is, by the way, also an opportunity where people who have more experience can start to vary and try to manipulate that image. So the equivalent of a matrix translation formula, but done simply by adding pixels or values in the loop. And if I show you the solution, it's actually quite straightforward, right? So you can have them try it on their own, try to see if they can get to it. There's a simpler way, by the way, to write this function. I just thought of it when I saw it. But you can see that there's a lot of variations that you can do here on that exercise. You can make it harder, you can make it simpler. Again, for those that finish really fast, you can ask them, try to slant the entire picture, try to manipulate it in other ways. So that was, you can imagine, what took most of the time. As you can see, I have a few more examples here. That was, by the way, all that was covered that afternoon, but I have a few more samples that you could use as well. This is another painting here. I also have a binary hand. You can see here the solution. The goal here would be to get them to turn the hand into numbers. So for example, if you went, let's say here, let's do 6, and you submit it, you can see there that 6 is being made with the hand. You would need to create very simple versions of this. It's not at all straightforward, but I left them in there as stock, as things that could be considered. I also have a binary clock. Binary clock would not be something they can do, but it is potentially something that you could do one step off. And if you come up with something great and simple and that the students enjoy, that you think students can enjoy, please share with the rest of the group. As I mentioned, I will put up a repo and I will take pull requests. So let's go ahead and go on to the next day. The idea of the third day was to think about simulations. When you think about simulations, you think about time and space. And the way that I represented it was with the animation of a shape. Again, the theme of the shape carrying out throughout the week. And you can see here that the goal was initially to be able to create a shape that moves throughout the page. Initially, we asked them to do it all horizontally, meaning you don't have to think about X and Y, and you don't have to think about edge detection. You're just trying to get this ball to move across the screen. The first time you do it, it's exciting, right? Then for those that are more advanced, you can ask them to try to do edge detection. That means you're moving across the screen on the x-axis. When you get to the end, you bounce back. Then when you get to the left-hand edge, you would bounce back, and so you would get this ball moving back and forth. You can do a variation of this with, say, a Pac-Man as well, where you're flipping the image when you get to the edge. However, that starts to get more complicated when it comes to the manipulations and the constructs of the language. For those that get through it very quickly, and I'd say about 25% of the class was able to do this, and it took them, it was quite of a stretch, but they managed it, and it wasn't simple, and they had to struggle with it. It was to bounce it off of 2 dimensions. And so I believe this might be the solution here. Let's take a look. And you can make this a lot smoother. I'm doing it slow simply so they can see how this is taking place. So this is a great exercise. This is one of those that is a lot of fun, and that it's surprising how simple it can be once you know the solution. But until you get there, you really have to think about several things at the same time, which makes it challenging. And as you can see here, I have the solution and then the bonus solution. This is the solution that we asked everybody in the class to be able to do, and you can see there how the ball is bouncing. I should say as well that throughout the week, they've been working on that 3 to 4 hour on the project. A lot of work has been done on Bootstrap. Every single team did presentations using Bootstrap, even if it was a single page presentation. So they've been working on that, thinking about their ideas, thinking about how to present them. I mentioned about half the teams wrote actual code, working code, running code. And so they were debugging and doing a lot of that work on that 3 to 4. So you walk them through an exercise, you give them some challenges, you let them get some small wins, and then at the end they work on the project. So that takes us to Thursday. Let's go ahead and move into Thursday. Thursday was the workshop, or the last sprint going into the presentations on Friday. And so the time was mostly spent on going deep on Bootstrap. There were a lot of things that they wanted to do and try that they were struggling with. And so we went around the room and helped them do that, prepare their presentations. We gave them some feedback on some of the things that we're trying to do. So that afternoon session was dedicated to that. As you can see there, in some days I have way more code that can be covered, but in general the idea was to give them something that would give them some immediate wins, that they would have some fun, to make it visual, and that wouldn't be too overwhelming. I think perhaps I'm missing 1 or 2 extra examples that could be smaller and less challenging, but I'll leave those to you. Again, one last time, as I mentioned before, if you come up with something cool, please share it with the team, because we could all benefit from it. So this is pretty much the end. As I mentioned, I'll remind you what I said at the very beginning. The goal is to inspire them. The goal is to have them have an aha moment, or to have one of those moments in where a spark gets lit. That is the goal, not necessarily to cover all of the aspects of computation in an introductory class, not to cover all of the algorithms that are mentioned on the slides. The goal is to get them to connect and to be not afraid of this content, to see that it is no different than anything else. So with that, I'll go ahead and close, and we'll be seeing each other online. Take care. Bye.